Hello, debt warriors, and welcome back to another episode of Millennial Debt Domination. I'm your host, Katie O'Shea. If you're a millennial or Gen Z and think retirement is too far off to worry about, you're not alone. In fact, nearly 60% of Gen Z and millennials have either no retirement savings or less than $5,000 saved. But here's the truth. The earlier you start planning, the more freedom and options you'll have later in life. It's not just about saving money. It's about envisioning what your post-retirement life will look like. Do you want to work part-time, move somewhere new, volunteer or travel more? Planning now helps ensure that your retirement years reflect the life you actually want to live. Today, we're diving into smart planning for life after retirement. We'll talk about the financial aspects, but also how the idea of retirement has evolved and what you should be thinking about when preparing for that phase of life. Joining me is Elizabeth Zelinka Parsons, co-founder of Encoraco, a retirement coaching program. With 2 decades of experience supporting lawyers in career transitions and professional development, Elizabeth brings valuable insight into navigating post-retirement life. In this episode, we'll cover everyday spending, housing considerations, working in retirement, and so much more. Now, let's get to my conversation with Elizabeth. Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to you. Today, we're going to be talking about planning for life after retirement. So to get started, why is it important for millennials and Gen Z to start thinking about post-retirement life now, even though it feels decades away?
Sure. It's a good question. I think one of the big blind spots that people have as they ponder retirement from afar is that the main thing you need to focus on is the money, right? Like, do I have enough money? And will I be able to maintain some semblance of my current lifestyle without working? And that's a very important question. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we all should care about that. However, the focus on that tends to undermine the thinking on everything else, honestly, your life structure, your identity, your sense of purpose, the things that continue to challenge you. Where are you going to have community and relationships? And because work provides so many of those things, at least in part, you can almost miss the fact that they too are going to be affected pretty dramatically when you retire. So what I say to people who are still decades away is it is very easy to completely miss that any of those things are worth investing in now in a way that allows them to be sustainable past your day-to-day working life. So that's a big picture answer, but I think it really gets to the heart of what people miss the most when they are thinking about this at age 35 or 40. They're just worried, like, what's my bank account look like? But there's so much more that needs to be monitored too.
How has the idea of retirement changed for younger generations compared to older ones?
So that's another really great question. I think the big differences are, as I see them, and as I've been working with people that were both very much boomer generation, and now I'm beginning to work more with people retiring, quote unquote, from full-time work in their 50s. That's becoming really, really common. And then I look at the generation below and think that people look at working life as something that can be very iterative, and it can change multiple times over what you might call a typical career span, which I think is really, really healthy. And I think what it permits people to do is embrace the idea that retirement can mean something different from just zero work, right? It can mean you're doing what you want to do with the people you want to do it with in the amount you want to do it. And therefore, maybe the word work doesn't even apply anymore. It's more like, now I'm putting energy into a passion. So I think the concept of retirement has changed from, in the boomer generation, it was like, oh, I'm done. I'm hanging out with friends and traveling. It's all leisure and I play golf all day. And I think the younger generations look at it as, no, I'm now entering into a chapter of life that I control, that I choose what I do. And it might mean I'm making money, but hopefully it doesn't mean I have to be.
So let's talk about the day-to-day spending. What does that look like after retirement?
Yeah, I think it's very fact dependent on, a particular person's situation. But I think what I see people needing to do to get comfortable is to really drill down on what they do spend and whether those things need to change or shift so that your resources are sustainable without the pressure to earn more money. Because the true sense of retirement should be, I no longer have to trade my time to fund my life, right? That's really what I think we're saying is I get to be more choosy about where I spend my time and what I do. So the corollary to that is, can I afford to live the way I want to live without that income stream from work? So what I think often happens with people when they're working is they are making enough money to pay for their life. So they don't really have to like drill down on every dime they spend. It's kind of like, I have enough, I'm fine. But when you get ready to retire, what I think you've really got to do is drill down on that and say, okay, what's really going out every month, and do my investments mean that I can fund that same amount, or do I need to cut back on certain areas, and if so, where? And just doing that simple analysis, I see, gives people so much peace of mind, because the visibility into it is really what they're missing.
And then do you think even though people are working and making money, do you think that actual working makes them spend more that you're not going to have to do after retirement, such as buying clothes, buying lunches out, buying coffees?
Yes.
People factor that in.
Yeah, I think you're making a good point there too, that there are some expenses that we all have in the background as a result of the fact that we're working that go away or shift. And it's useful to really look at those things and say, oh, look, I'm not going to have this commute. I'm not going to have to pay for parking, or I'm not, to your point, the wardrobe isn't going to need to be what it was. Those are really good points. And the other thing I'd say in retirement that people often forget is your spending profile changes decade by decade. So as people get older, their footprint of spending tends to shrink. And so you can't assume what you're spending in your 50s, let's say, is going to match what you're spending in your 80s.
How should people account for inflation and cost of living increases over 30 plus years? Because as I mentioned, this is kind of geared towards millennials and Gen Z. How can they account for that?
Yeah, I think, it's important to make realistic assumptions about the costs that are probably going to increase. And I think we can all assume, or I try to assume, taxes are part of that. I don't think any of us think we're going to be paying less in taxes over time. So, it's really working with a financial planner, or even, whatever financial calculation tool you use, to make very conservative assumptions. I think it's far better to assume and plan for the worst case scenario and beat it than it is to be overly optimistic and say, oh, sure, we won't have inflation and taxes will go down, and then discover that you are, fighting a battle you weren't prepared to fight, at 60. So I just say to people, just build in really conservative assumptions and plan for the downsides, and you're always going to be in good shape.
Why is it critical to plan for rising medical expenses, even with the assistance of Medicare?
Well, I think, again, that's a wild card that none of us truly control. I guess we all hope we're going to be in good health, that we're going to be able to fully care for ourselves. But as we know, that's just simply not always the case, no matter what we do to try to fend off illness or disability. So one thing I believe is so useful, and I think is still accessible to people in the millennial generation, the age they are, is, really planning for disability insurance. I mean, your most valuable asset at that age is your ability to work. I mean, that is literally the most valuable thing anybody possesses, the ability to earn income. And so that form of insurance is often overlooked, but extremely valuable if needed. And then as one gets into later years where that becomes maybe less relevant, I think just recognizing that you want optionality when it comes to supporting your life and your needs if the worst happens, because it isn't just financial. I mean, we all, I think, observe how incredibly expensive medical care is and health insurance is. But so look at other things like, am I in a really strong supported community? Do I have family around me or not? What are the other buttresses that exist in life that can mitigate, just the incredible hardship that a medical problem could create financially? And start thinking broadly about those things, because I think it's very fact specific, depending on a person's situation.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point about thinking about if you have family around you to kind of help out if you have medical problems, because people tend to decide, do I want to move? Do I want to stay where I am when I retire? So what are, the pros and cons of downsizing, renting, or staying where you are?
Right, absolutely. So I always talk about this with my clients who are getting ready to retire. One of the first questions I ask is, are you going to relocate? Because that's a whole separate project and it's very dislocating. It can be exciting, and oftentimes people will sort of have this idea that, I've loved going to this particular place on vacation every year and I think I'd love to live there. Well, living somewhere and vacationing somewhere are two very different things. And so one thing I remind people of is when you relocate, you are going to have to replace all of your service providers, right? Like your doctors, your professionals, people who cut your hair, the people who've helped you with all these various things in your life, your community, your friends. I mean, you're setting those things aside and you will have to recreate them. So that's kind of a big deal to recognize, and it's something you can overlook pretty easily. The second thing is with the variety of ways to test out new places with short-term rentals and things like that, I recommend to people, try before you buy. I mean, go down and go live 6 months somewhere in a long-term rental and see if you like it before you commit. And these are really pivotal things that can reduce what later become mistakes, and where people feel like they've isolated themselves or they've moved to an environment that is like actually not that stimulating full time. Yeah. So those are some strategies I recommend to people so that they can get their head around what it's going to take to relocate and really re-embed themselves in a way that's going to be enriching.
How does your vision of retirement impact how you'll need to save?
When I think about retirement, I think, as I was indicating earlier in one of my responses, that I look at that stage of life as not necessarily the end of earning years. I just look at it, it's an opportunity to do what you really want to do and what you are really excited by. And one of the mistakes in people's thinking is that pure leisure is what they want. I mean, it sounds great when you're working hard. It sounds great. You're like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to just have nothing but fun. But the truth is, leisure is pretty boring when it's not living in tension with some sort of effort. We really do thrive as human beings with some challenge and continued growth and working on things. And so I don't mean work in the sense that, again, you're spending your time and energy on something that's a slog. But often what I see with the people we're working with is that they end up finding new pathways that, while they don't necessarily have to generate income, they end up generating income because they're passionate about what they're doing and they're putting their energy forward in a valuable way. And when that happens, it really reduces how much you have to invade your savings. And if you can right size your spending to match this new income stream that is connected to something you're enjoying anyway, that you would do whether it paid you or not, boy, what a win. Because now, whatever that nest egg is, it's sitting there compounding. You're not touching it. So the longer you don't have to invade that, the more it grows, and you let that sit 10 years and it's going to double again. So I do remind people to think about retirement as not necessarily the end of earning, it's just the end of slogging, and even a part-time engagement of some type can really make a massive difference, and reduce the amount you have to actually save.
Are you finding it more common for people to continue working after retirement?
Absolutely, as long as it's something they're excited by. And I do tell people, don't discount that, and also don't do things you don't want to do either. Don't, I mean, give yourself the freedom. Like if you want to, a lot of people, this is a great example, they want to write a book or something. They've always wanted to write and they haven't had time, and they don't know where to start. So it's like, well, go write your book, and who knows, it may end up being successful, or it might open the door to a consulting business that you'd be really energized by, or it might open the opportunity up to become a speaker or a teacher, but in other words, you're living in material you're excited by. So the fact that you're showing up somewhere doing something of value isn't really work at this point. It's more like, finally I get to play in the space.
Can working part-time impact your Social Security and your taxes? And if so, how?
Well, no, you pay taxes on income you earn, but you wouldn't be diminishing your Social Security, your opportunities there at all. That's just age based. So as soon as you're qualified, you're set there. And I see people who are able to generate money in a fun, energizing way. Honestly, they tend to be the happiest in this phase we're calling retirement, because they're in the world with people, adding value, growing, and they're softening the impact on their financial lives.
It's not always about money when people want to work part-time. It really is about
Right.
giving them something to do and keeping some sort of routine, because we really do thrive off some sort of routine.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Yeah.
How should younger generations plan for the possibility of work optional retirement versus a full stop retirement? Because I think a lot of people, younger generations, they think of what you had mentioned before. It's all leisure and everything. How can we
Yeah.
plan for it not to be like that?
Yeah, I think what I would recommend that, people ponder, because a lot of this is really reflection, it's thinking. We're so busy, I think, in our middle adulthoods, which is right where millennials are right now. They're trying to get their families raised, they're building their security, so it's busy. I remember. And you don't reflect, you don't stop and ask yourself, what do I really want? Like, what am I doing all this for? What is the thing that my life is about beyond like the crises that I'm facing today, trying to get my kids to this practice or that school, or, and trying to get my job done. So if you can zoom out and really ask yourself, you know what, if I reach that magic moment when I get to call all the shots in my life, and I'm going to live a spectacular decade after that, what would that be about? Like, what would be true? And clearly, most people will say to me, look, sure, I want to travel. I want to enjoy myself. I want to pick up some hobbies that I've had to set down. But I also want to make a contribution. I want to be of value somewhere. And that's usually where there is the biggest blank spot. So we do a little bit of digging and say, well, look, if you hadn't pursued the path you did pursue professionally, is there a different one you wish you had? Is there some unlived life you have? Was there a goal you set way back when that you never had time to get to? But sometimes that can really spark some of these ideas around optional work. Like, oh, I really always wanted to work with animals and I never got to do that. So, hey, maybe I can get involved with an organization that's doing that. And sure, if there's a little bit of income that comes from it, fantastic, wonderful. So those are ways to explore these unwalked paths, that can be really, really intriguing.
I want to talk about planning now. So why is basic estate planning, even in your 30s or even in your 20s, part of a long-term financial security?
That's a really good idea to think about. Well, first of all, the composition of families happily these days, can take all kinds of forms and shapes. And so beyond just thinking about your money and what happens to my money when I die, or my assets when I die, what goes into estate planning are things like healthcare power of attorney, your financial power of attorney, recognizing like we're all finite human beings. We are all subject potentially to being incapacitated in some way. Who's going to make decisions for you? Even at 35, if something happens and you're not in a traditional marriage, well, you might not realize that your partner in life at the moment does not have authority legally to make those decisions for you if you can't, or to step in and manage your financial world if you need that done. And that happens commonly. I mean, I'm a lawyer too, and I'm aware, often that people, they imagine because they are domestic partners that person is the obvious person the hospital will turn to or the bank will listen to. Not at all. It is the next of kin. And so, setting those structures up so they work the way you want them to work at any age is so crucial. So that's one thing. And then the second thing I think is to recognize that you want to be thinking intentionally about what is your financial legacy, who's it going to, and those facts are going to change over your life. So if you've got small kids, you've got to have guardianships, you've got to think about those things. But as you move a decade beyond that and your kids start growing up, you've got to re-examine all this again because now they're in a different place. So I think just being in the habit of checking in on, maybe every 3 to 5 years, does all this work the way I want it to? If something happened to me tomorrow, what would the people around me be able to accomplish easily? And what would be really hard? And how do I make sure it's working the way it ought to work? I think that's just a really valuable exercise.
What advice do you have for someone who feels like retirement is too far off to worry about now? I feel like that's everyone of a younger generation. So
Yeah. Well, I think the thing I'd say is that getting out ahead of this gives you your very best shot at making it the most spectacular chapter of your life. That's the missed opportunity of ignoring it. So, I mean, look, a lot of people just think, it'll take care of itself. I mean, I don't know. I'll get there. And if my money's in good shape, I'll figure it out from there. Sure. That's possible. But it's also possible you will miss incredible opportunities because you didn't set yourself up for them in a way that allowed you to seize them. Because there are certain pathways that I've seen people pursue that were only available to them because they started thinking about how to lay the groundwork 10 years earlier. And, they were intentional. And so that word intentional to me is the key to the whole thing. The more intentional you can be about building the pathway toward what you want, the better, because you're more likely to get what you want. You're more likely to create something that feels like, hey, this is what I've been working for. I mean, you can default into things for sure, but is that necessarily going to guarantee the most fantastic outcome? Possibly not. So I just look at it more as, gosh, what am I leaving on the table if I blow this off and I just wing it? Who knows?
Because I feel like a lot of the younger generation think I'm just never going to retire anyway, but that doesn't have to be the case. You could definitely retire if you start planning for it. Especially now, this is the perfect time for millennials and Gen Z to think about it, believe it or not. Right. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Likewise. Thank you. It's great questions. And it's fun to talk about all these topics as they relate to the millennial generation. It's great.
I think so. I think it'll resonate well with my listeners. So thank you. Retirement is more complex than many people realize. As a millennial or Gen Z listener, it can be easy to put off thinking about retirement. Maybe it feels too far away, or you worry you'll never be able to retire. But here's the truth. Retirement is possible for everyone with the right planning and mindset. Many people find they still need structure in their lives after they retire. Whether it's working part-time, volunteering, or pursuing a passion project, staying mentally and socially engaged can help you thrive during this new phase of life. If you're considering relocating in retirement, don't just think about the financial costs. Also factor in the emotional and lifestyle changes that come with starting over in a new place. And one final reminder, if you haven't already, begin thinking about estate planning. It's an important piece of your long-term financial well-being. Once you've laid the groundwork, be sure to revisit and update your plan every 3 to 5 years as your life and goals evolve. And with that, we wrap up another episode of Millennial Debt Domination. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rate and review us there. I'll talk to you next time, Millennials, Gen Z, and everyone else tuning in. Bye.